Redundancy is a situation where an employer decides that there is now or in the foreseeable future insufficient work of a particular kind for an employee to carry out. So for example, you could have a situation where you have a company that uses a lot of steel in its production, along with many other raw materials. It's quite difficult getting steel at the moment, it's very expensive. Whilst the order books are high, the actual ability to use the steel in production is reduced. That is essentially what a redundancy situation is, when there are too many employees carrying out the particular work that there is a drop in demand for. Often at this time of year, I have employers coming to see me because it's often the end of their financial year. So they're looking at the figures and deciding where is making money and where isn't in a business and what they can do about it. For many businesses, often their biggest overhead is staff, and unfortunately that often means they're seeking to make staff redundant. When an employer comes to see me about potential redundancy, one of the most important things is for them not to have a closed mind. And by that I mean they mustn't already have made a decision, right, we want this person out, because they need to follow a fair process in relation to it. Generally speaking, that involves deciding a pool of people that are affected by a potential redundancy and then applying criteria to those people. In relation to those criteria, scoring each individual employee, and then in relation to the employee that finishes at the bottom, or those employees, if more than one, that finish at the bottom, provisionally selecting them for redundancy. Often when an employee is told they're provisionally selected for redundancy, all they hear is, I'm being made redundant. So it's very important for an employer to express that you are not redundant, you have been provisionally selected. It is important for an employer, I think, to consider with an employee if there are any alternatives to actually making them redundant. Redundancy itself can be costly for an employer, and obviously it has a dramatic effect on an employee because they're losing potentially their livelihood and may not be able to find another job very easily. So if there are other jobs available, even at lower pay, different roles, it's important to find out if the employees that are being considered for redundancy are capable of performing those roles. It is only at the end of the consultation process, if there aren't any alternative jobs and the employee is going to be made redundant, that the employee actually becomes redundant. If you enter into a settlement agreement, what it does is it means the employer can rest assured that the employee is not able to bring a claim at all. That's effectively what it does. You're buying off a claim. If you think an employee has a potential claim, then it is always best to see if you can try and settle it in that way, because as I've often said, pursuing a claim in a tribunal is expensive for both parties, and it should only really be used as a last resort. So if you can settle it earlier, it's usually at a lower value than you may have to settle it later on.